This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Africa's confirmed coronavirus cases double in 18 days. Coronavirus cases surge in Libya after repatriations. And France launches SAHEL coalition to fight rising jihadi violence. Hello and thank you for joining us on Africa Live. I am Peninah Karibe. Joining me in studio with the business headlines is Uche.
Thank you, Peninah. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Biz. Ratings agency Fitch forecasts South Africa's economy will dip by 5.5% this year. And the IMF approves an additional $111 million in COVID-19 funding for Rwanda. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, it is back to you, Peninah.
Thank you, Uche. And we begin with the latest on coronavirus cases across Africa. The continent continues to record high numbers of recoveries, which currently stands at more than 97,000. Nearly 6,000 people have died from the disease, while the continent's cases account for less than 3% of the global total. The World Health Organization is warning that infections are accelerating. Africa's confirmed cases have doubled in less than 3 weeks. Well, some of the most vulnerable people in the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic include migrants. That's according to the International Organization for Migration. The world body says many of migrants' livelihoods have been and continue to be severely impacted by COVID-19. Many cannot access public services or some of the government's public COVID-19 relief measures. Here in Kenya, more than 300 Ethiopian migrants have been receiving food as part of efforts to mitigate the effects of the pandemic. There are an estimated 40,000 Ethiopian migrants living and working in Kenya. Over 300 Ethiopian migrants and their families today are receiving food and other essential items from the IOM, the International Organization for Migration in Nairobi, Kenya, a small effort to mitigate the broader impact of COVID-19 in the region. The migrants, many of whom have been living and working in Kenya for years, have lost jobs and income due to movement restrictions and curfews and the general economic slowdown, all brought by the pandemic. All right, now let's take you to Libya, pardon me. There has been a sudden surge of coronavirus cases in Ceuta, a city in the southern part of Libya. Health authorities are blaming the increasing cases on the repatriation of nationals who were stranded abroad. CGTN's Daniela Pearson has that story.
The number of coronavirus cases has surged in Libya this month. Health officials at the National Center for Disease Control say there have been more than 140 new cases in the southern city of Ceuta. The North African country closed its borders in March to stop the coronavirus from spreading. But last month it began arranging flights to repatriate Libyans stuck abroad, but without a quarantine requirement.
Before the return of repatriated citizens, we were getting through this crisis safely. If you remember, test results came back negative for a whole 7 to 8 days, even though we were receiving samples from all over Libya. But the return of repatriated citizens was a turning point in the pandemic, and the spreading in Ceuta also played a part in the situation worsening.
Officials at the medical center in Ceuta say they have not yet identified patient zero who triggered the outbreak.
From the time the disease was discovered in Ceuta, people in the city hadn't followed the preventive measures in place. Instead, they underestimated and belittled the problem and kept markets open as well as gatherings while not adhering to the curfew that was put in place.
With Libya mired for years in civil war, it no longer has strong health systems, nor a unified approach to the virus, with the country now divided between two rival administrations.
But what was truly disastrous in Seba was that our national center and other scientific committees had asked civilians not to leave the city when the pandemic was discovered, so as not to transmit the disease to nearby towns. This advice was not followed, and hundreds of families with high risks of infections left Seba, which is what led to the transmission of this disease to several cities.
Prime Minister Fayez al-Sarraj, who heads the internationally recognized Government of National Accord, has formed a committee to investigate the spread of the coronavirus among people returning from abroad. Daniela Pearson, CGTN.
Zimbabwean President Emmerson Mnangagwa has welcomed China's second donation of medical supplies to the African country. The supplies are expected to help Zimbabwe deal with the coronavirus pandemic. China has now donated more than 700,000 face masks, 21,000 testing kits, and 100,000 pieces of personal protective equipment to Zimbabwe.
It's the second batch of medical supplies from the Chinese government to Zimbabwe. It includes 165,000 surgical masks and over 25,000 pieces of personal protective equipment. The first batch of medical supplies was received in April.
This is a clear demonstration of the comprehensive strategic partnership relationship between the two countries, Zimbabwe and the People's Republic of China. This support and the collaboration continues to have a tremendous impact on Zimbabwe's efforts to fight the pandemic and ensure that all our frontline workers have adequate protection in the course of their duties.
The donation ceremony was held at State House in the capital, Harare.
This donation is a testament to our time-tested friendship. This year marks the 40th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between our two countries. In the past 40 years, in solidarity, we won freedom. In solidarity, we defended justice and democracy in international relations. In solidarity, we stood strong in difficult times. And in solidarity, we safeguarded the achievements of national independence and national sovereignty and territorial integrity.
Last month, China sent 12 medical experts to Zimbabwe for a 2-week program. The team shared the experience with their counterparts in Zimbabwe and provided prevention and treatment guidance. Cham Hono, CGTN.
The recently released white paper on China's fight against COVID-19 has been praised by the health professionals in South Africa. We spoke to the president of the Health Professions Council in South Africa, who says the Chinese government's swift response and joint efforts made by the people against the coronavirus in Wuhan was very impressive.
Being able to build a hospital that is purpose-built for dealing with COVID in a short period of time. Being able to mobilize health resources from other parts of China to the epicenter so that they could contain it. And I think part of the issue is the fact that the national government has the ability to move into a province and bring in all the resources to ensure that you have an expedited, complete response to the unfolding pandemic. And those are the things that were remarkable. And I think one of the things that we should be learning from China is the fact that even though they had a province that was affected, there was a national response that ensured that that hotspot was contained.
Health authorities in Beijing have confirmed 2 new COVID-19 cases. It comes a day after the Chinese capital saw its first local infection after more than 50 days. Officials say the latest cases are 2 men who worked together and that contact tracing is underway. Both patients have been admitted to the hospital. 6 markets they visited recently have been partially or fully closed. Beijing is also now reversing a decision to send 1st to 3rd grade students back to school on Monday. As Beijing faces fresh cases, Hubei province is lowering its alert level. Officials announced it will drop from 2 to 3, the second lowest level. The loosened restrictions go into effect on Saturday. Pools and sporting venues are among the places that can now reopen. The former epicenter of COVID-19 has not seen any new infections for the past 24 days. Our reporter Zhao Yunfei was at the press conference and tells us what this announcement means.
It gives a larger capacity of human activity during the pandemic. First of all, it gives a guidance of people's reaction during the pandemic. Mask, you don't need to wear a mask anymore if you're in open air spaces. Also in spaces with less crowded places, you can also not wear a mask at all. That's announced by the Deputy Governor of Hubei province. Also, when you downgrade the level from level 2 to level 3, technically it means that in the near future, the entertainment facilities such as the KTV, the swimming pool, the gym, the bars and cinemas, many other places, it's up to the municipal level to decide whether they will be open, decide on the situation of that place. Now, Wuhan is used to be the epicenter of the coronavirus outbreak, so many of the entertainment facilities hasn't opened for so long time, and that's part of the reason why the provincial government tried to make the good news on Friday night, and hopefully we can see some of the changes in the near future, let's say in the weekend.
You're watching Africa Live. Let's take a short break. Coming up, France launches Sahel coalition to fight rising jihadi violence. And UN chief urges continued international support for Mali amid growing terrorist threats.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
France has launched a coalition of West African and European allies to fight militants in the Sahel region. It's an effort to engage in more political cooperation to boost a military effort that has failed to contain the violence. More than 40 defense and foreign ministers have endorsed the revamped coalition that was first announced in January. France has more than 5,000 troops in the region combating Islamist insurgencies. However, the security situation continues to deteriorate. Militants are continuing attacks reaching as far south as Côte d'Ivoire. The new joint task force would provide European special forces for regional armies. It would also offer financial aid from countries such as Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Burundi's top court has ruled that President-elect Evariste Ndayishimiye should be sworn in as soon as possible. The Constitutional Court aims to end the power vacuum created by the sudden death of President Pierre Nkurunziza on Monday. The court says, were the country to hold fresh elections, then legally the Speaker of Parliament, Pascal Nyabenda, would become the interim leader. But the President-elect's recent victory has made the interim period unnecessary. Ndayishimiye was elected in May to replace Nkurunziza, who had been in power for 15 years. The United Nations has expressed horror following reports mass graves have been found in Libya. The sites were discovered after the UN recognized Government of National Accord took control of a town from rebel forces. There are calls for an independent investigation. Sarah Walton reports.
The United Nations support mission in Libya says there are reports of at least 8 mass graves discovered in recent days. The majority are in Tahuna, about 90 kilometres southeast of the capital, Tripoli. The town had been occupied by forces loyal to General Khalifa Haftar, known as the Libyan National Army. but it was recaptured by the internationally recognised Government of National Accord on June 5th. Now, the GNA says initial reports suggest some victims were burnt while others were buried alive. It's promised to launch an investigation. Libya has been gripped by conflict since the former leader, General Muammar Gaddafi, was killed during an uprising in 2011. The country is now split between the GNA in the west and the rival Tobruk administration in the east, which is allied to Haftar. The United Nations says the warring factions have resumed ceasefire talks. But the discovery of these mass graves has increased concerns about the fighting in Libya. The UN says it has received hundreds of reports of enforced disappearances, tortures and killings in Tahuna, and it's verified that numerous summary executions were carried out at the town's prison. The group Human Rights Watch Libya is calling for an international investigation into allegations of crimes by both factions in the country, with neutral forensic experts to examine the graves and help identify remains. Sarah Walton, CGTN, New York.
In Uganda, air pollution from Kampala's congested traffic has been a long-standing problem. A coronavirus lockdown has significantly reduced pollution levels, and there has been a push to keep it that way. That's why two Ugandan innovators are hoping to make motorbikes go electric, as Leon Sanyanga reports from Kampala.
In the suburbs of Kampala, a motorbike taxi driver powers his way through the streets, just as many others do daily. With one main difference, his electric bike is quieter and cleaner and costs him a lot less to maintain.
I got this bike because I don't have to spend much with mechanics like we usually do. Besides, it's a unique bike.
It takes about 2 hours to fully charge the bike's batteries. The innovators of this particular model are hoping they catch on.
The main difference between an electric bike and the petrol bike is, of course, electricity and petrol. Now, what does that mean for someone who rides a bike business-wise? The petrol drivetrain, the fuel powertrain, has a lot of moving parts. Piston rings, seals, gaskets. You need to lube all those parts. It's a lot of maintenance. Now, the electric drivetrain is virtually maintenance-free.
The e-bike can cover about 70 kilometers on a full charge, and cleaner motorbike taxis could transform the city's air quality.
We have very bad air quality in Kampala, and at the same time those people riding those bodas have also very little income because all their money goes on fuel, oil, maintenance. So we think we have to change something here. We all agree that in the next 10 or 20 years the world will be electric or roll electric.
The price tag on one of these bikes is $1,500. More than 20 electronic-powered motorbikes have been developed here and are already in use. There are also plans to make electric-powered cars. The company wants to transform from 2 to 4 wheels, but it's still a work in progress.
If you look at this is an axle of a small car popular in Africa. African cities called VITs. So we just adapted it, we have the motor hubs here, we have the batteries. So in this case, you will have 2 batteries because you just need a much more bigger capacity, It will go up to buses and things like that.
Uganda currently runs 2 electric-powered buses. That could be the future of commuting around town. For now, the e-bike is likely to help many like Chiza go a long way without spending too much. Leon Sanyanga, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
South Sudan's government and UNESCO have launched a radio program to provide education to school children across the country. Schools are still closed as part of the country's efforts to contain the spread of the coronavirus. CGTN's Patrick Oyet reports.
Education on air.
Nunu Nabil is a 19-year-old student. She is due to sit South Sudan Secondary School Certificate Examination this year.
Lessons are based on the new national curriculum.
But with schools closed, she is now relying on a radio program run by South Sudan's government with support from UNESCO.
Through the origin.
However, Nunu says it is not the same as being in class.
Learning in school, the teacher is there, and you can ask him the question you don't understand. And if he's not in the class even, you can go to him in the office. But learning to radio, from the radio, you cannot ask.
To negative F, where
the radio lessons don't cover all the subjects, and the program is currently run on only 2 radio stations in the country, making the lessons inaccessible to some.
There are plans underway to involve the community radios so that we can extensively reach many school children as far as possible.
UNESCO is supporting the radio program to ensure that education does not stop because of COVID-19. It is receiving funding from Finland, Sweden, Norway, and Dubai. However, it says more funds are still needed to support education over the longer term.
We need classrooms, a school environment that is good and can prevent disease. Learning can continue even in periods of pandemic or any other concern. So we need to be thinking big. We need to be thinking for the future of the children.
Education in South Sudan consists of 8 years in primary school, followed by 4 years of secondary education, and then 4 years of university instruction. But that education has been disrupted for thousands of children because of civil war and now the coronavirus. South Sudan's government says 73% of the country's population are illiterate due to the long years of civil war, and that education remains one of its top priorities. The country's education ministry says it will continue to explore new alternatives to provide education to as many people as possible. Patrick Poyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
The United Nations has expressed grave concerns over the security situation in Mali. Fighting in the West African country has taken a heavy toll on the local population. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said terrorist activity is continuing to fuel violence between communities.
The escalating conflict between communities in central Mali is raising concern. Hundreds of civilians have been killed and thousands displaced since March 2018.
I'm appalled by allegations of summary killings and executions of at least 38 civilians by the Malian armed forces in 2 villages in Mopti region last weekend, in one case with the support of traditional hunters. I welcome the government's announcements to investigate these serious violations, and I call on the authorities to do everything possible to hold the perpetrators of these heinous crimes accountable.
Terrorists and other armed groups have capitalized on the COVID-19 pandemic, complicating the already extremely challenging situation.
Mali has not been spared by the virus, and neither has our peacekeeping mission on the ground. More than 100 United Nations personnel have been affected. While many of them have recovered, 2 peacekeepers lost their lives, and we mourn this loss. I'm encouraged by the swift action taken by the government to respond to the pandemic in close cooperation with MINUSMA and other international partners.
Despite the challenges, the country has been making inroads politically, raising much hope among the Malian people. The country held successful legislative elections back in March and April. Government has initiated intercommunal dialogues to resolve tensions and differences.
We encourage the Malian authorities to continue with its efforts to accelerate the disarmament, demobilization, reintegration operations and persist in it until its finalization. It is only with a finalized DDR that we can achieve a total disarmament of armed groups and bring peace to Mali.
The number of people in need of assistance in Mali is expected to increase to 5 million people in the next months. The UN is calling for renewed international action to avert this and destabilize effects of COVID-19. Chom Hono, CGTN.
A Hong Kong court has upheld a travel ban on media tycoon Jimmy Lai ahead of his trial in August. Lai was arrested on charges of illegal assembly and intimidation of a man at a 2017 march. Our reporter Judan tells us more from Hong Kong.
On Friday, the High Court rejected media tycoon Jimmy Lai's application to change his bail conditions so he can leave Hong Kong. The 72-year-old is accused of intimidating a reporter at the Victoria Park in Causeway Bay on June 4, 2017, and has pleaded not guilty to a count of criminal intimidation. A trial is scheduled to begin on August 18th. As part of his bail conditions, he is not allowed to leave Hong Kong. Lai had applied to the High Court to remove the condition barring him from leaving Hong Kong on May 22nd, but withdrew his application. Judge Alex Lee said Lai did not provide the court with confirmed travel plans, and it was difficult for the court to remove the condition. The condition requiring Lai to report to the police was removed after the prosecution did not object to it that day. Lai is also charged with 2 counts of unauthorized assembly and 3 counts of taking part in 3 unauthorized assemblies last year, since the National People's Congress approved plan to impose national security law for Hong Kong. Some defendants prosecuted in connection with protests have jumped bail and has fled to other countries. According to local media, convener of Hong Kong Independence Union Wei Chen Kai-hui, 30-year-old, has escaped to the Netherlands after jumping bail while facing an illegal assembly charge in protest last year. He has not reported to the police since June 4th.
China is rejecting a British report that criticizes a planned national security law for Hong Kong. Britain's Foreign Office says the legislation breaks the one country, two systems framework that guarantees Hong Kong's autonomy and its residents' freedoms. The Hong Kong government calls that inaccurate and biased. It insists Hong Kong will keep its autonomy and that the new law is aimed at a small number of people for cessation, subversion and terrorism. China's foreign ministry says national security legislation in each country lies within central authorities' powers, and China is no exception. A spokesperson says outsiders are anxious about the law because they won't be able to use Hong Kong to undermine China's stability. She added the more they try to interfere, the more determined China is to implement the legislation. Strong storms that have been pounding southern China are moving north. Provinces including Henan, Hubei and Hunan are now seeing heavy rain. Officials are worried about landslides and flash floods in mountainous areas including Guizhou province. Heavy rain began in southern China more than a week ago, causing casualties and flooding hundreds of homes and businesses. Authorities are warning the public to prepare for massive floods this summer due to the record rainfall.
The rain is heading north as floods start to recede in southern regions. Anhui province now sees continuous downpour. On the city streets, the water has become knee-deep, causing cars to stall. Having lingered over the south for the past week, the rain has lightened up in most areas, but the risks remain. In the southwestern city Chongqing, several people just survived a mountain flood. A rescuer recalled the dangerous moment.
The water was running strong when we arrived. It reached my belly. We saw 4 of them trapped. The houses were submerged. They were waiting for help on the 2nd floor.
In South China's Guangdong province, the rain has stopped, but a recovery has just begun.
We have 4 excavators, 2 shovel loaders, and 16 trucks working on the roads. We also have 53 people cleaning up fallen trees and mud.
And more extreme weather could be on the way, as high temperature alerts have already been issued for the coming days, while the province is also bracing for the landfall of a typhoon. Guanchao, CGTN.
Time now for the day's business news, and for that we cross over to Uche.
Thanks, Peninah. And coming up on Africa Live Biz. Ratings agency Fitch forecasts South Africa's economy will dip by 5.5% this year. And the IMF approves an additional $111 million in COVID-19 funds for Rwanda.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
Well, let's start off in South Africa. Ratings agency Fitch expects the country's economy to shrink by 5.5% this year. That is as the coronavirus lockdown batters an economy already in recession. Now, back in April, Fitch downgraded South Africa's credit rating further into junk territory. The downgrade was a result of the lack of a clear path towards government debt stabilization. It was also due to the expected impact of COVID-19 on public finances and growth. In an outlook on sub-Saharan African sovereigns, Fitch projects that in the current fiscal year, the deficit will surge to 14.4% of GDP. That's with government debt seen rising to 80.9% of GDP. Meanwhile, the International Monetary Fund has approved an additional $111.06 million in disbursements to Rwanda. Now, the funds are expected to address the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on the country's economy. The funding brings the total IMF COVID-19 support to Rwanda to about $220.46 million. It will help finance the country's urgent balance of payments and budget needs. Rwanda recently implemented one of Africa's strictest lockdowns to try to stem the spread of COVID-19. Now, authorities have since begun to gradually open up the economy, although some restrictions still remain. And in Uganda, the country has presented its budget estimates for the 2020 and 2021 financial year, worth about $12.2 billion. The biggest portion of the budget will go towards financing infrastructure projects, security, debt repayments, education, and health. Here's CGTN's Michael Baleke with more.
Uganda's financial plan comes at a time when economic activity has severely contracted following the COVID-19 pandemic. But Uganda's finance minister has told Parliament that the country's economic outlook looks positive and says the 2020-2021 budget will help it to fully recover.
The focus of the budget for next financial year places emphasis on supporting livelihoods and the recovery of business enterprise without losing focus on our long-term development initiative. To this end, the government will support the private sector to scale up production, sustain and increase employment.
The Bank of Uganda projects in the year ahead, the economy will experience slow growth attributed to a combination of global supply chain disruptions, travel restrictions, measures to limit contact between persons, and the sudden decline in demand.
On the whole, household expenditure, investment, exports and imports are projected to decline in this year, 2020. Accordingly, the Bank of Uganda has revised down its projection of economic growth to a range of 2.5 to 3.5% in 2020.
But the finance minister believes prioritizing infrastructure like roads, the railway, electricity, investing in health, education plus industry will reignite the economy. Government has also waived interest on tax areas, deferred payment of corporation tax for 3 months, exempted VAT on hotels, liquefied gas and processed milk. According to Bank of Uganda, growth is projected to gradually recover, but there is significant uncertainty over the depth and duration of the current slowdown as the COVID-19 pandemic continues to spread. Critics argue that the current budget is more of a political document and does not address the key issues affecting the country today.
The implication again is that we're going to keep borrowing because we can't actually sustain the budget because people have lost jobs. Remember, government is able to get revenue through taxing people, pay as you earn and things like that. But where people are not working, where is government going to get the money?
Uganda's total debt now stands at more than $13 billion. The government says the budget will be revised to focus more on production as opposed to consumption, so that the country will be able to increase its exports in order to offset its growing debt. Michael Baleke, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Well, let's get some international news now. China and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations are set to carry out cooperation in digital economy this year. Now, the world's second biggest economy and the 10 ASEAN countries will expand cooperation in 5G, the Internet of Things, AI, industrial internet as well, and of course, digital epidemic prevention. Here's CGTN's Zhang Yibing explaining.
Leaders from China and ASEAN countries sat together online for closer cooperation in digital economy amid the COVID-19 pandemic on Friday. Congratulatory letters were sent in from the premiers of China and Vietnam, holder of this year's ASEAN rotating presidency, both expressing good wishes. Each country's information technology minister expressed their will to combat the COVID-19 pandemic and restore the economy. China's experiences were shared, including providing medical equipment, optimizing diagnosis, and meeting people's life demands through digital technologies.
We are willing to continue to share experiences with ASEAN countries and give full play to the potentials of the digital economy and make a positive contribution to protecting lives, restoring economic stability, and promoting sustainable growth.
Since the road to recovery is uncertain, ASEAN and China should intensify information exchange on expertise, best practices, innovative technology to effectively address the pandemic crisis issue while keeping the economy alive and market functioning.
Now, almost half of China and ASEAN countries' populations are mobile users, and both sides in recent years are expanding comprehensive cooperation. Experts say these will lay a solid foundation for the deeper development of the digital economy in retail sale, transportation, manufacturing, finance, and agriculture. After Friday's opening ceremony, a series of activities will be held afterwards, covering smart cities, big data, and artificial intelligence. And experiences will be shared on pandemic control and prevention through digitalized methods, as well as digital infrastructure construction and economy transformation. The participating countries say they will take the opportunity of the digital economy cooperation to help mitigate the impact of COVID-19 on people's lives and economy, and inject a new impetus into a closer China-ASEAN community with a shared future. Zheng Yibing, CGTN, Beijing.
Now, with Wuhan back in action in so many ways, the city is now proactively seeking for an investment. Wuhan has made many efforts to rebuild its economy. That's after the unprecedented coronavirus pandemic hit the city hard. Here's CGTN's Zhao Yunfei reporting.
Wuhan is welcoming foreign investors back to the town after the pandemic. Nicola Brothel, CEO of Air Liquide China, says he's glad to see the city regaining its vibe. He says his local branch has gone through some difficult times.
To make sure that we would be able to follow every one of our employees all the time, to know if they needed support and how can we support them remotely, because some of our plants had to operate. We could not stop the plant at any time.
During the pandemic, Air Liquide has been offering oxygen to local hospitals. It also provided industrial gas to the construction of Huoshenshan and Leishenshan, the two new hospitals designated for COVID-19 patients. Despite the pandemic affecting the city, Brothel says he chose to stay.
The opportunities we see here have not changed, because we don't invest for ourselves. We invest because our customers invest here. And we see that I mentioned high-tech customers, electronic customers. They are still accelerating their projects here in Wuhan.
Sitting in central China and along the Yangtze River economic belt, Wuhan commits to create a friendly environment for foreign companies. Wuhan's top leader says the pandemic has strengthened the city's solidarity.
The heroic city is ready to take off again. We warmly welcome foreign companies to continue to invest in Wuhan.
Wuhan desperately needs to recover its economy as it enters the post-pandemic era. With its message of openness, it hopes to rebuild trust with the rest of the world. Zhao Yunfei, CGTN, Wuhan, Hubei Province.
Well, that is all for now on Africa Live Biz. But coming up later on Global Business Africa, we'll be taking a closer look at Kenya's new budget and, of course, some of those controversial tax plans. All that coming up top of the hour. For now, it is back to you, Peninah.
Thank you, Uche. You're watching Africa Live. Coming up after the break. UNESCO raises the alarm about the threat the coronavirus pandemic poses to museums worldwide.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
The United Nations cultural body, UNESCO, has said the ongoing pandemic has impacted museums around the world. UNESCO says 10% of them may never reopen, while others will have to halt new projects. This is attributed to the lockdowns implemented by various governments. Here's CGTN's Astatal with more.
Museums hold some of the treasures of history and the world's heritage. But lockdowns as a result of the ongoing coronavirus pandemic have seen the numbers drop to unimaginable levels. According to the Paris-based International Council of Museums, at least 10% of private and public museums might never reopen. This has left UNESCO concerned.
What I'm sure that if we lose one museum or one cultural center or one theater, it's affecting diversity. What I'm sure that the whole ecosystem that we have right now ensures the diversity.
The institution also says most museums largely depend on tickets sold to tourists and visiting scholars. But with lockdowns implemented by governments, coupled with travel restrictions, things have been tough.
For many reasons. It's not only because they are affecting on financial issues. Some of them have lost the subvention that they received from governments or local states. Some of them have lost the sponsors because sponsors decided to put the money in health and education. And many are faced with the trouble that they didn't receive any income in the last 4 or 5 months.
But in countries such as the Philippines, Indonesia, Montenegro, and Iraq, new projects have been halted. As conflict continues rocking some nations, there are fears that precious historical gems may be lost. One such country is Somalia. Here, UNESCO is working with local authorities to set up new museums and rebuild a destroyed one. Astatal, CGTN.
An Adelaide community garden started by a group of African refugees has become so popular its produce is being sought in other states around Australia. The community farms maize, which is a main staple for over 300 million Africans. Australia normally grows sweet corn, and the Adelaide community garden is hoping to expand its production as the nation embraces the taste of maize. Tulisha Balala tells us more.
Oh, wow, the maize are ready here.
Adelaide is a world away from the African farms where maize is traditionally grown. But after Mohamed Yotham fled Burundi as a refugee, he was determined to be able to eat his favorite food in his new home in Australia.
And one of the main food which you are eating almost every day was maize flour.
4 years ago, the amazing Northern Multicultural Service started this community garden to grow produce used in African and Asian cooking.
We have a very good response, not only from African communities, but even from Middle East and from Asia. And now we are teaching even Aussie to use the maize, and they like it. That we brought something which bring a sense of optimism, and this garden has been a center of that.
But amid the COVID-19 pandemic, the community space is more than just a patch of fertile soil. For those who've lost their jobs, they say it's been a source of comfort.
When I see the garden, it reminds me home ground, so I feel I'm home.
Another way of a sense of belonging for people like me who came from another country.
Demand for the maize has quickly outstripped supply, with requests even coming from other states. The community garden has just bought a strip of land across the road to plant more maize. And as the garden continues to grow, they hope one day there'll be enough maize in Australia to produce flour. Thuli Shabalala, CGTN.
In Uganda, 4 men are in custody over the alleged killing of a silverback gorilla named Rafiki. Wildlife authorities at the Bwindi Impenetrable National Park in the southwest of the country say Rafiki was discovered dead after he went missing on 1st June. Isabel Nakiria reports.
The 4 suspected poachers were found in possession of bush pig meat and several hunting devices. One of the suspects also confessed to killing the silverback after it charged at him while hunting at the Bwindi National Park in southwestern Uganda. Rafiki died after sustaining an injury by a sharp device that penetrated its internal organs. The silverback was the head of the Nkuringo gorilla group, the first to be habituated at the Bwindi National Park. About 19 gorilla groups exist at Bwindi. The park protects an estimated 400 mountain gorillas, roughly half of the world's gorilla population. Gorilla trekking is the main activity in Bwindi, and the Uganda Wildlife Authority says they are monitoring the group to ensure it's ready for tourism when the park reopens to the public. Uganda has reopened its savanna parks for tourism, but the primate parks will remain closed until further notice for fear of transmission of COVID-19 to the animals. If found guilty, the 4 men face life in prison or a fine of up to $5 million. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN Kampala, Uganda.
And coming up in sports.